Hello, everybody. Thank you for having us. I think in the auspice of, under the auspice of this being the sports business, it may be kind of nice and a good opportunity for me and for my friend Sean to be able to offer, kind of like Antonio did yesterday with open water swimming, the mindset of an athlete. And along those lines, I'd also maybe like to tie in a little bit to perhaps how it pertains to the business aspect of what we're here for, too. But I think bringing it to the overall and broader perspective of why I think the business aspect is so prescient, that the athlete core of what we're doing reaches so much of what is powerful and meaningful within, I don't know, the world we live in, that there is a business around it. And I brought a medal, partly because, and mainly because, we had a clinic a couple of days ago here with a bunch of kids, local kids. We were in the 1968 Olympic pool. And it was very special for Sean and myself to be able to experience that pool. And there's a story that I'm going to tell you about this particular medal that I think offers, for me, it certainly offered a dose of perspective. And I think for those that tend to kind of hear it in a sense, I think it can do the same. And I think in the context of what the aims are, when we're thinking about how we're going to impact sport, a certain context and perspective is important. And I heard a presentation yesterday, and it was the 49ers presentation, Jesse talking about education and about bringing youth up and about instilling in them the kinds of qualities and inspiration and giving them the tools to be able to move forward with what they believe in. And my story starts off when I was very young. I never knew what it was like not to know how to swim. I grew up by an ocean, and my family lived their lives around the water. Mother and father, my grandmother and my grandfathers. And we had no choice but to learn how to swim. If anything, it was for a reason of safety. Because of where we lived, we were thrown in the water so that we could be out of our parents' eyesight so that they could kind of have faith that we would be okay. And we learned how to play. And we played in the water, and almost inevitably, we started to kind of explore other avenues of playing in that water. And we had ways of exploring in the ocean and learning how to swim in a very functional way, in a moving body of water. Eventually, we took our interest to the pool, kind of learning the formal aspect of it. And from there, my interest and fascination with what I was doing took off. The community that I was around, everyone learned how to swim. It was where my friends were. It became the world that I lived in, the water that I swam in. And from then, I never really turned back. I started dropping other sports, and at a pretty young age, I started to become very good. And in that sense, I believe it's a bit hard for me to talk to younger athletes about the sense of adversity that I think is such a great thing to be able to express, because at a very young age, I was actually on a pretty accelerated path towards my goals and dreams. And as a 9-year-old, there was one particular image that stood out. And I was sitting in front of the television with my mother, and we're watching the Olympic Games, 1992 Barcelona Games. Happened to be the one that Sean Jordan was swimming in. And what was so amazing about that for me, and what still to this day I remember, it made an impression on me. There was a gentleman walking out at that particular time holding a picture of his mother. He was swimming for the United States of America, and he was about to swim butterfly. And I remember him walking out with this picture and my mother. The story that on television, watching it at home, can be very powerful, and the stories are powerful, and part of the reason we love to watch them. And they told the story about how his mother had passed and wasn't going to be able to see him accomplish his goal. And he'd been trying to accomplish this for the past 3 Olympic Games. A veteran of the sport, trying to win a gold medal he had sought since he was a young child himself. And as I'm sitting there watching him, I can sense the tension. I also remember looking at it and thinking, oh, it's beautiful. It's an outdoor pool. And I remember the kind of it being sunny and looking at that aspect of it. But I remember them diving in and having to get called back. I remember them sitting on the block. I remember them having to wait. And I remember seeing this particular gentleman sitting on the block, breathing in through his nose and out through his mouth. And my mother turned over to me and she said, do you know why he's doing that? And pretty intuitively, it's easy enough to see, you know, I could tell he was trying to relax. Big, deep breaths in through his nose and deep breaths out through his mouth. And at that particular moment, I saw somebody who was trying just not to freak out, just trying to keep it together for a few more moments. And whatever that moment meant to him, it meant so much that he was at the point of being able to barely keep it together. It meant so much to him that it made an impression on me, because walking down the street every day, I wasn't always seeing people going to work and barely able to keep it together. Breathing, you know, like, you know, you don't see people live like that day to day, walking down the street. And then from then, I started to kind of dive into the scope of learning what it would take to try to get there. Really difficult to connect the dots looking forward. To be able to look forward and think, like, if I want to end up where this particular gentleman is, I need to do this, 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 and this, and this. It doesn't quite work that way, but I decided to dive in and give it a go. And the aspect of potentially winning an Olympic gold medal was something that was sticking in the back of my mind. And I can fast forward now to the point that this actually became a possibility. Is up until that particular time, as a 9-year-old, and up through this particular time, my other love for the sport was something much bigger and broader. I simply liked to swim. I liked to be in the water. I liked to play. I liked being in the ocean. The pool was this kind of very narrow focus for it. And it was something very meaningful and visceral. One particular event was going to potentially take me there, the 200 backstroke, and that's what I put my attention toward. And in 2004, in the Athens Olympic Games, I put myself in a position to potentially win 3 Olympic gold medals. And amazing being at the Olympic Games, you could imagine showing up to a country like Athens, and you can understand the gravity that that would hold, and the way that this particular country embraced it. So for me, I had already been to 1 Olympic Games. I'd won a silver medal. I knew that I was potentially capable of doing this. And I show up to swim the 100 backstroke the first night, and I end up accomplishing a goal of mine I had set out for when I was 9 years old, won an Olympic gold medal. Wait a few more days, and my particular best event, the 200 backstroke, was the one that meant the most to me. This is the one that I think at some point in my career, I felt like this was going to mean something to me, that kind of be able to set a standard for whether I could consider my career maybe successful or not, and that was the thought in the back of my head. And I remember walking out to that particular night in Athens, and I had this kind of flashback moment. I was walking out to the blocks, and it was an outdoor swim meet, and it was pretty out. And I all of a sudden started imagining some 9-year-old boy or girl sitting there watching me marching out to the blocks. My mind started to travel, and I had to kind of catch myself, and I had some work to do. I couldn't necessarily start being nostalgic at this particular moment. And I decided, well, I didn't decide, but it was also a really powerful moment in the sense where it also made me realize just exactly where I was. It was beautiful, right? I could set the stage. There were 10,000 people in the stands. My parents were in the stands, and I had old coaches and friends and family. And they had come to cheer me on in this particular moment, and teammates on the side. And for this particular event, I'm going into this event into finals nearly 2 seconds ahead of the person who's second place. And I'm a world record holder going into this meet and going into this event. And I'm expected to, potentially achieve a goal that I had set out for since I was probably 9 years old. But for all intents and purposes, when that gun went off, I had one of the best swims of my entire life. I had set the world record only 5 weeks before at our U.S. Olympic trials. And I remember pushing off that last wall and seeing kind of peripherally, because in backstroke, you're staring straight up at the sky. You can't really see over the, 5 meters over into lane 1 or 8. And I ended up looking just peripherally to kind of see where I stood. What was I kind of getting myself into? And I could see that I was ahead. And I could see that no one was passing me the last 5 meters. I touched the wall, and I realized had this realization kind of coming to fruition. I stare up at the scoreboard, and I had just won Olympic gold medal again in my favorite event. And I end up shaking the other gentleman's hand. The gentleman who won silver was the one who also won silver in the 100 backstroke. He's a good friend of mine. He's from Austria. He's going home with 2 silvers. He was going to be going home with a hero. And everyone seemed pretty content, happy, and we're getting out of the water, and this is about where the story begins. And I'm walking back towards the media. And I hear a sound behind me that was probably the most disconcerting sound I think probably to this day I've ever heard. The sound of 10,000 people gasping. And I remember turning around and looking up at the scoreboard as my gut was sinking, and I see that my name had been dropped from first all the way down to last place. Not only that, that's kind of a strange way to go down to last place without even having to do anything, right? And I look next to my name, and it says DSQ. And I realized at that particular moment what had happened. And I'm staring at the scoreboard, and I think, you've got to be kidding me. I came all this way, and I was not expecting this. And didn't really know how to take it. I don't think you expect to experience a moment like this. I tried to take a second to be able to gather myself and look back and think what I had done. I couldn't remember. I looked to the media. I asked them to replay me the video if they could, and they did, and I couldn't figure out what had happened, and no one came and told me what had happened. I realized I had no answers for anybody that was there. This was affecting everybody. The person who got silver, he was getting bumped up potentially. The person who got fourth, he was getting bumped up to potentially sit on the podium. This was affecting many people. And I decided I wasn't going to be able to do any good being stared at by 10,000 people or by TV cameras. And I respectfully recused myself, and I said, I have no answers right now. I'm going to take a walk. And it was that particular walk, that 5-minute walk, which was maybe the most important 5-minute walk of my life. And I got to question in a real way just exactly what this moment was going to mean to me, potentially for the rest of my life, certainly up to this particular point. And as I'm walking back, I'm wondering if I would be doing this, if I would have done this again and ended up in this particular moment. And strangely enough, I was able to stand there as I'm walking back. No one's walking in the other direction. And I'm able to actually tell myself without hesitation, yeah, I would absolutely do this again. And that surprised me. And I had to ask myself why. And I could realize at that particular moment that I was actually somewhat quite fulfilled. and quite satisfied. And what ended up kind of becoming the realization was that aspect of that child, someone going to play in the water as a young child and playing with friends and family and kind of learning how to find oneself in the activities that they're doing, ended up coming to me in a light where all of a sudden it shone on me that what I had achieved up to this point was my entire journey leading up to this particular moment, the process that got me here. And I realized that I didn't necessarily need to stand up there and get that medal. I was able to kind of get this satisfaction in knowing that I had done everything I could, and I had actually ended up falling into something that I loved so much that I ended up finding a lot about myself within it. I actually ended up making something as a young child that was my own. And not only that, but I was given that by my friends and family. My parents recused themselves. They said, Aaron, you can have this. You don't have to go. This is going to be yours. If you want to do it, you can. And strangely enough, a few minutes later, within a half an hour, a woman in white comes up. She goes, Aaron, you've been reinstated. And I was like, you've got to be kidding me. It's like after all this epiphany, right, I've been having, and now you're throwing this at me. I wasn't elated all of a sudden. I wasn't jumping up and down that someone was coming up to me telling me I had just received this medal I thought I was going to want since I was 9 years old. I was looking at her going, I wonder if I could say no. And I didn't. I realized that wasn't appropriate. I said yes. I'll be there. I'll put some clothes on and I'll meet you there in a few minutes. And I ended up standing on that podium and looking down at that particular medal and realizing it was going to mean something different to me from then on than it ever would have had that not happened. And I can put it on now, right? And the thing is I never really swam for this to begin with. This wasn't the point. This isn't the point of any of us doing what we're doing. This is a process of, this is a symbol of what we've been through. This is a symbol of that journey we've been through. And I can tell you very sincerely that had I experienced this and won an Olympic gold medal, but maybe done it not in a way that was entirely up to a certain standard or integrity, I don't know that I would feel as good about myself. I was able to look back and say, was I, during this process, actually a good person? Was I handling myself with a bit of integrity and grace? Win or lose? You can imagine if you're standing up on the podium and you win an Olympic gold medal, but no one's even going to turn and shake your hand out of lack of disrespect. Do you think it would mean that much to you? Just because you win a gold medal doesn't necessarily mean you're a good person. Doesn't necessarily mean you have it all figured out. And it's really important to kind of put it in this perspective that this is a symbol, I think, of something much deeper than that hard work. It's also how you do it. There is a level of integrity and grace with which you can learn as a youth to be able to handle yourself. The real-world application and metaphor for sport, which is so prescient and something we cannot lose. And it's about how good of a person you're going to be throughout this entire process. Because that's, at the end of the day, all you're going to live with. When Sean and I get together, we don't say, hey, have you seen this lately? Check it out. And he breaks his out and goes, yeah, have you seen this one lately? It's pretty cool. These are for you guys, right? This is not for me. It is, but I don't break this out until I show people like you and I show the kids in Mexico City the other day. And along those lines, this is a matter of being able to keep the perspective along the way throughout those distractions. And I think that's the aspect, too, that segues a bit into what we're doing today and the aspect of business, is there is another element to athlete participation aside from the aspect of showing up to train every day. And it's also in ensuring that our youth are engaged in the participatory process of understanding the world they live in and the world they get to make up. This is their sport. These are their sports, these are their activities, and we listen to them in regards to how we move forward. This is for them. We wake up every day and we say, how can we make their lives and their futures better in this regard? And it's something that I think to this day, a lot of athletes across the world, across sport, are still seeking and will continue to seek that kind of representation, which strangely enough, sometimes can elude athletes at various levels. And I think that that's a somewhat interesting way to kind of pull back from this element of perspective, because, and that's also, I think, why we're here too, in the sense of sitting up on this panel, the aspect of athletes sitting up here and having a say in how their sports are conducted and how their sports move forward is as important as their ability to show up and train for what they're doing. So it's a great pleasure for me to be here today, to be able to express that, to be able to be an athlete at a sports business conference, and in general, what we have is a community and a culture we can create that is something so beautiful and powerful and meaningful for those that are like the kids we sat in front of in Mexico City just the other day. So thank you for your time. I appreciate it.